Ever wonder what it's like to lose your name, your body, your future, all before breakfast? Welcome to marriage, medieval style. You don't get a ring, you get a contract. You don't get a honeymoon, you get paraded through the village to prove you bled. And if you're a woman, you're 13. Your husband's 37. And love isn't part of the agreement. No privacy, no choice, no escape. This isn't a wedding. This is a life sentence wrapped in velvet and violence. So, before you whine about your situationship or your Tinder date ghosting you, ask yourself, could you survive a world where I do meant surrendering everything you are, forever? Smash that subscribe button like you just found out your dowry's been stolen, and ring that bell like your in-laws are banging on the wedding chamber door. This is Midnight Empire, where romance dies, truth bites, and every bedtime story ends in either heartbreak or history's ugliest annulment. Grab a blanket, lie back, and pray your medieval husband doesn't snore.
Medieval Europe wasn't exactly Tinder-friendly. Bathing was rare, teeth were medieval. Deodorant was a fever dream. The average peasant smelled like hay, smoke, sweat, and pig. And yet, somehow, people still got horny. Humanity finds a way. Marriage? That was more of a business contract than a love story. Your local lord or village priest might arrange it. Sometimes you got to meet your future spouse a week before the wedding. Sometimes at the altar. Sometimes after the wedding night when you realized the lump beside you was your cousin. But hey, lineage. The church had opinions with a capital O. Sex was supposed to be strictly for procreation. Anything else was a sin. Oral sex? Hellfire. Sex on Sundays? Hellfire. Enjoying yourself? Straight to hell, do not pass go. And let's not even talk about masturbation. According to the clergy, every time you touched yourself, an angel died, probably from disappointment. So what was sex actually like? First, privacy was a myth. Most peasants lived in one-room homes. Parents, kids, goats, all under the same thatched roof. If you wanted to get frisky, you either did it quietly under a blanket or risked eye contact with grandma knitting 3 feet away. It wasn't uncommon for families to cough loudly or sing to give couples a moment of dignity. Sometimes the goats joined in. Mood killers. The beds? Straw mattresses, filled with bugs, no real pillows. Maybe a shared wool blanket. Not exactly the Four Seasons. And don't forget the chamber pot filled with everyone's nightly regrets, sitting inches from your head. Sexy. As for the act itself, well, positions were dictated by theology. Missionary was the only God-approved setup. Anything else and you were basically reenacting the fall of man. The idea of pleasure, especially for women, was seen as suspicious. If you liked it too much, you might be a witch. And speaking of witches, orgasms were literal evidence of demonic possession, according to some medieval scholars. A woman moaning in ecstasy? Clearly the devil was involved. Better call the Inquisitor. Nothing says foreplay like a witch trial.
Now let's talk contraception. Or more accurately, the terrifying medieval attempts at it. Some women wore dried weasel testicles as amulets. Others used potions made of dung, mercury, or ground-up bones. None of them worked, but they probably did kill the mood. Condoms? Technically, yes. Made from sheep intestines, reusable, washed and dried between uses. Nothing quite like saying, "Hold on, let me rinse my sheep gut to get things going." Oh, and consent? That's where things get dark. Marital rape wasn't considered a crime. Husbands had legal rights to their wives' bodies, and saying no didn't really exist. Women's pleasure wasn't discussed. Their pain was often ignored. In many cases, sex wasn't about connection, it was about control. Now you might be wondering, what about the nobles? Surely things were better up in the castles. Not really. Nobles had nicer beds and cleaner sheets, but the cultural shame and awkward theology were the same. Courtly love was romanticized in poetry, but in practice, it often meant affairs, manipulation, and scandal. Kings kept mistresses. Queens were expected to stay pure and pop out heirs. Everyone was watching everyone else's bedroom like it was a royal soap opera. And let's not forget the clergy. They were supposed to be celibate. Spoiler alert, they weren't. Many priests had secret lovers or entire families hidden away. Some even ran underground brothels. The hypocrisy was thick enough to spread on bread. Speaking of brothels, sex work was both condemned and tolerated. In many towns, brothels were regulated by the church. That's right, the same people preaching abstinence were collecting taxes from prostitutes. Medieval logic. Most brothels had strict rules: no kissing, no emotional attachment, and absolutely no heresy mid-thrust. Some cities even had designated red light districts, complete with colorful banners and moral panic. And STDs? Rampant. Syphilis ran wild. No one really understood what it was, so treatments ranged from mercury baths to leeches on your genitals. Spoiler, neither helped. Both hurt. Despite all of this, medieval people kept having sex. Behind haystacks, in meadows, during festivals, sometimes even during church services. Humans are nothing if not determined. And in some rare, beautiful cases, there was love. Real love. Couples who managed to connect despite the theology, the hygiene, the But the church didn't stop at the wedding night checklist. No, they had full manuals. Clergy would explain, sometimes in sermons, sometimes in confession, what positions were allowed. Spoiler, it was missionary or bust. Anything else? Sinful. Even if it felt better. Especially if it felt better. And when it came to timing, the church was weirdly obsessed. There were days you were not allowed to have sex. Sundays? Off limits. Fridays? No way. During Lent? Absolutely not. During a woman's period? Hell no. After childbirth? You're kidding, right? While fasting? That's a spiritual crime. Basically, you had a grand total of about 47 minutes a month when sex was technically okay, and only if you weren't enjoying it. Meanwhile, in the countryside, peasants were figuring things out their own way. Most of them had no formal sex education, unless you count overhearing grunts from the barn or watching animals mate, which, by the way, was more informative than anything the church ever said. So, yes, medieval people had sex. A lot of it, and in a lot of very questionable circumstances. Picture a peasant couple. They live in a one-room hut. There's no privacy. Their kids sleep in the same room, their parents too, and maybe a chicken or 3. If you wanted to be romantic, you'd whisper sweet nothings while stepping over your uncle's snoring body and trying not to wake the baby. Luxury. Now let's talk about contraception. Or rather, the complete lack of it. There were methods, of course. Some involved herbs, some involved prayers, others involved animal dung, and we are not joking. One popular birth control method involved inserting wool soaked in vinegar into the vagina. Another involved mercury. Yes, mercury, as in the thing that causes brain damage. As in, congratulations. Your birth control just turned into a neurological crisis. Still others used magical charms.
Women would wear amulets carved with mysterious symbols. Some believed if you jumped backward 7 times after sex while reciting a psalm, you wouldn't get pregnant. Guess what? They still got pregnant. But that's where things get really dark. Because if pregnancy occurred outside of marriage, the consequences were brutal. Shame, public punishment, sometimes execution. Women bore the brunt of it, ostracized, beaten, even accused of witchcraft. Meanwhile, noblemen could father a dozen bastards and just call them squires. Let's also not forget that bathing was rare, very rare. Imagine undressing someone who hasn't washed in 6 months. You're not getting turned on. You're trying not to pass out. Hair full of lice, breath like boiled cabbage, skin caked in grime and guilt. You didn't take clothes off for pleasure. You took them off like you were defusing a bomb. And yet, somehow, despite all this, people still wanted each other. They still snuck into haylofts, still arranged trysts behind monasteries, still passed love notes written in badly spelled Latin on stolen parchment. Because desire, however messy, inconvenient, and disgusting, has always been stronger than shame. Of course, there were rules for nobles too, but they were negotiable. A noblewoman might be expected to remain pure until marriage, but her husband? He had options. Courtesans, mistresses, scullery maids, stable girls. Basically, if she breathed and curtsied, she was fair game. And, unlike peasants, the upper class had the privacy and time for seduction. Some castles even had secret passageways for illicit midnight visits. Think of it like medieval Tinder, except instead of swiping right, you tapped twice on a torch bracket. And if you were a royal, forget it. Kings had entire manuals written about their sexual exploits. Charlemagne had so many lovers he needed a waiting list. Henry I of England had at least 20 illegitimate children, some of whom he acknowledged by handing them castles like party favors. But for every velvet-draped boudoir, there were 10 damp hay piles and 1 priest screaming from the rafters about eternal damnation. Let's not skip the topic of same-sex relationships. Yes, they existed. Yes, they were common. No, they were not accepted, at least not openly. The church called them crimes against nature. Punishments ranged from forced confession to flogging, imprisonment, or worse. But records still show countless cases of men caught embracing too tenderly or women accused of sharing a bed too often. Which, frankly, sounds more romantic than anything involving a medieval husband. Now, you may be wondering, was there ever any fun in this? Well, yes. But it came with a side of paranoia. Pregnancy wasn't just likely. It was basically guaranteed. Every rendezvous was a gamble, especially for women. If she got pregnant outside marriage, her life was over. If she miscarried, they might accuse her of witchcraft. If she gave birth to twins, that was suspicious too. Double the babies? Clearly the devil was involved. Even married sex wasn't safe. Too much desire between spouses was frowned upon. Carnal excess, they called it. If a couple seemed too into each other, the church got nervous. Passion was a slippery slope, apparently. Next thing you know, you're smiling during the act, and they're burning you at the stake. And if that didn't scare you off, there were diseases. Oh yes, medieval STDs were their own special kind of nightmare. Syphilis, gonorrhea, something called the French disease. No offense, France. These weren't just common, they were catastrophic. Treatments included mercury, leeches, bloodletting, and prayers. If you think modern dating is risky, try kissing someone whose mouth is filled with ulcers and then drinking holy water to cure it. Good luck. So let's recap. Medieval sex was awkward, public, risky, and heavily policed. It was equal parts desperation and devotion, theology and filth. It could kill you. It could shame you. It could ruin your life. And yet, people still did it. Because even in a world of plague, piss trenches, and anti-sex sermons, human nature refuses to be scrubbed clean. Desire isn't logical. It's not sanitary. It doesn't care about church calendars or chamber pot schedules. It simply is. Messy, persistent, unstoppable. Like love. Or rats. Now, let's venture into the darker corners, the truly horrifying extremes of medieval sexuality. There were entire manuals written by monks detailing what you could and couldn't do. Some priests even handed out weekly schedules: Mondays for procreation, Wednesdays for abstinence, Fridays for penance. Saturday? Maybe. Sunday? Absolutely not. Sabbath sex was a one-way ticket to damnation. And yet, people still found ways. Behind the curtain of rules and repression, real human connection flickered. Lovers snuck away from chaperones. Letters were hidden inside loaves of bread. Secret symbols were sewn into handkerchiefs. Barns became boudoirs. Lovers kissed by candlelight and risked everything just for one night of something that felt like freedom. Because even under the weight of religion, politics, and disease, sex remained what it always has been. A spark of rebellion. A stubborn act of humanity. A whisper that said, "I'm alive, and I want to feel it." That sex in medieval times was never just two people and a moment of passion. It was religion, reputation, rot, and rats. It was a chore, a ritual, a transaction. Sometimes it was penance, sometimes it was punishment, and once in a while, if the lice weren't biting, if the priest wasn't watching, and if no one had died that week, it was almost tender. Almost. Let's be honest, most of it was just logistics. Getting undressed in a room with no heating, no deodorant, and no clue what the hell foreplay is? That's not sexy. That's survival. And if you're thinking, at least the nobles had it better, think again. Velvet doesn't hide the stench of bad choices. And gold-plated goblets don't make up for the fact that your marriage was arranged when you were 9. But hey, at least there were aphrodisiacs, like dried beaver testicles, or powdered stag antler, or wine mixed with burnt wool and a whisper of goat hair. Whatever worked, I guess. And if you didn't have aphrodisiacs, just go to church. Nothing gets the blood pumping like being told your body is a sin. Still think you were born in the wrong era? Medieval sex wasn't just horrifying. It was dangerous. If you didn't get excommunicated, you got an infection. If you didn't die in childbirth, you probably still named your kid after the local saint, in hopes they wouldn't be taken by the next plague wave. And yet, here we are, you watching this video, me telling you about the worst sex in human history. And all of it? Proof that somehow humanity survived, through sweat, through shame, through really, really bad decisions. Because people don't stop doing dumb things just because it's the 1300s. They do them more. But here's the crown jewel of medieval sex nightmares: the church's obsession with sperm conservation. Spilling seed outside of marriage or outside of a womb was a mortal sin. Masturbation was considered worse than adultery because it wasted life. And yes, there were penance charts. Ejaculated once alone, say 20 prayers. Did it during Lent, 50. Used your left hand, may God have mercy on you. Some monasteries went even further, locking teenage boys in stone cells at night to keep them from touching themselves. Cold stone, no blankets, just guilt and shame echoing off the walls. And yet, despite all this madness, love still happened. Illicit affairs bloomed in castle gardens. Peasants snuck kisses behind haystacks. Secret trysts unfolded in abbey kitchens. Even through oppression and ignorance, human connection clawed its way through the mud. Because no amount of shame can fully suppress desire. Because even in an age of fear, people still wanted to feel close, to be touched, to be seen, even if the only privacy they had was a moment behind a hay cart, or a kiss in the dark after curfew, even if they had to carry a wooden bucket afterward, even if the world told them it was wrong, because it felt, if only for a breath, like freedom.
Now let's talk about weddings, because nothing screams romantic like a legally binding livestock exchange. In many parts of medieval Europe, marriage was less about love and more about land, livestock, alliances, and social climbing. Two families would come together, agree on a bride price or dowry, shake hands, maybe spit on it, and boom, you're married. Sometimes the bride and groom didn't even meet until the ceremony. Sometimes they were children. But here's the twisted bit. It wasn't considered a real marriage until it was consummated. And yes, there were witnesses. Some noble families had a charming tradition called the bedding ceremony, where the newlyweds were led to their marital bed by a crowd of cheering, drunken guests. The couple would undress, get in bed, and then the guests would stay, offering advice, chanting prayers, or just watching to make sure it happened. If you were lucky, they'd leave before the actual act. If not, well, enjoy the show. In some cultures, bloody bed sheets were displayed the next morning as proof of virginity. No blood? Big problem. Accusations, shaming, sometimes even annulments or punishments. Which is especially disturbing when you realize how many of these brides were underage. And if a marriage turned sour? Too bad. Divorce was nearly impossible. Adultery could get you branded or killed. Homosexuality was illegal. And celibacy, outside of a monastery, was considered suspicious. There was one narrow, painful path: walk it or suffer. Meanwhile, the church dictated when and how you could have sex. Certain days were off limits. Fridays? No sex. Lent? Forget it. Holy days? Nope. Pregnant? Better not. Breastfeeding? Forbidden. Menstruating? Absolutely not. If you actually calculated all the no-go dates, married couples had roughly 100 acceptable nights per year. And positions? Only one was officially sanctioned: the missionary. Anything else was labeled unnatural. Oral? Sodomy. Rear entry? Heresy. Standing up? Might summon a demon. Some priests even wrote manuals warning couples not to enjoy sex. Pleasure was a sin. Moaning was suspicious. Eye contact? Maybe dial it back. The goal was simple: reproduction. Love, joy, satisfaction, those were pagan distractions. But people are people, and they rebelled in quiet ways. They snuck into haylofts and storerooms. They carved hearts into tree trunks. They exchanged poems and trinkets. They whispered under the moonlight. They found each other in a world that told them not to, and sometimes they got caught. Records exist of couples fined for fornication in a church or bawdy conduct in the fields. There were trials, punishments, public shaming, but also evidence that people still tried, still loved, still reached out in the dark, and sometimes, miraculously, they reached back. Because even in an age of shame and control, the human spirit is slippery, and desire, it finds a way. Even if that way is through a pile of hay, next to a bucket, while the rooster crows. Now let's dig into contraception, or rather, the frantic, half-baked medieval attempt at it. Because here's the deal. People absolutely wanted to avoid pregnancy, especially peasants who could barely afford to feed themselves, let alone a surprise 9-pound bundle of plague-prone joy. But without science, condoms, or actual reproductive education, medieval folk turned to the next best thing: witchcraft, folklore, and trial by disaster. Want to avoid pregnancy? Chew wild carrot seeds every day. Doesn't work?
Try stuffing wool soaked in wine up your vagina. Still no luck? Some women tied weasel testicles around their thighs because that made sense to someone. Others wore amulets containing crushed frog bones, boar's teeth, or even dried blood. One charm supposedly worked if you whispered a Latin prayer while standing on one leg and farting. I wish I was joking. Meanwhile, herbalists, mostly women, were quietly passing around recipes: tansy, pennyroyal, rue. Dangerous herbs with abortive properties. Some worked, many didn't, and a few were fatal. But if you were desperate and poor and terrified, they were your only option. And yes, there were condoms. Kind of. Some used linen soaked in vinegar and tied on with string. Others used animal intestines. But these were rare, expensive, and deeply uncomfortable. Most people just rolled the dice. And when the dice came up baby, you hoped it lived. You hoped you lived. Childbirth was brutal. No anesthesia, no sanitation, no doctors, just midwives, prayers, and maybe a screaming chicken for moral support. Women died constantly. In some towns, childbirth was the second most common cause of death, right after infection from filthy doctors. And yet, the population kept growing, because sex still happened, even when it was terrifying, even when it was regulated, even when it could kill you. And this wasn't just a peasant problem. Nobles had their own horrors. A king might have dozens of illegitimate children. Court ladies were groped, seduced, traded in marriage deals like horses. Some queens were forced to prove their virginity to bishops. Others were locked away in towers when they failed to produce heirs. And if you were royal and gay, good luck. That secret could cost you your title or your life. And then there was the church. Ah, yes, the church. Simultaneously, the moral compass of Europe and one of its most hypocritical institutions. Clerics were supposed to be celibate. Many were not. There are records of monks caught in brothels, bishops with mistresses, abbots fathering children, and priests accused of sexual assault. One archbishop reportedly kept a harem. Another blessed prostitutes in exchange for confession. Yet they still preached abstinence from the pulpit while hiding lovers behind the altar. And don't get me started on relics. Certain churches claimed to have holy chastity belts, actual metal devices said to preserve virginity and ward off sin. In truth, they were probably torture devices, invented more for imagination than real use. But they appear in manuscripts and myths, symbols of fear, obsession, and the weird medieval urge to control the human body. Because that's what it always came down to, didn't it? Control. Sex was dangerous, messy, powerful, and so they tried to tame it with laws, lies, leeches, and lechery. And failed. Because you can't chain instinct. You can't preach away desire. Not even in a stone chapel lit by beeswax and shame. You wake up the next morning sore, confused, and possibly pregnant. No one knows, because medieval contraception is not a science. It's a gamble made with herbs, hope, and outright denial. Let's talk birth control, or the catastrophic medieval attempt at it. If you're a peasant woman trying to avoid a sixth child after losing the last 5 to plague, famine, or a particularly aggressive goat, good luck. Some used pennyroyal, a plant known to encourage menstruation. It also encouraged kidney failure and death. Others tied weasel testicles around their thighs. Not joking. Apparently, rodent scrotum was the original Plan B. There were pessaries made of honey, wool, and crocodile dung, though the dung was more Egyptian than medieval. But the absurdity carried over because why not? Nothing screams sexual health like stuffing literal animal crap inside you
and hoping for the best. Men, on the other hand, pulling out and prayer. That was the strategy. And when that failed, well, the church reminded you that every child was a blessing, even if it came with another mouth to feed and one less crust of bread to go around. And speaking of the church, let's address the medieval morality police. Sex outside of marriage, a sin. Sex on Sunday, a sin. Sex while naked, sin. Sex for fun, double sin. If you weren't trying to make a tiny baby for God, you were basically fornicating with the devil, and he was judging your technique. Confession booths filled up with shame, sweat, and confusion. Father, I touched myself while milking the cow. Father, I had impure thoughts during the maypole dance. Father, I imagined the blacksmith shirtless, and now my loins burn. Forgive me, for I have sinned, and it felt incredible. But for the married folk, surely that was more respectable. Sure, respectable. In the same way eating spoiled meat because it's the only thing left is respectable. Marriage wasn't about love, it was about cows, land, alliances. You married at 12, hoped your husband didn't smell too much like turnips, and got pregnant before your hips finished growing. Romantic, right? First nights weren't private either. Droit du Seigneur might be more myth than fact, but public bedding ceremonies? Entirely real. You could have your in-laws watching as your sheets were inspected the next morning for signs of blood, proof of virginity and successful deflowering. No pressure. And if you were barren, you weren't just infertile, you were cursed. Clearly. Maybe a witch, maybe you danced with fairies, maybe your womb was cold, which, by the way, medieval physicians genuinely thought was a thing. They prescribed warm baths, soft music, and the advice that you should just relax and think fertile thoughts. Meanwhile, your husband was cheating on you with a tavern girl who only had 2 teeth and a generous outlook on bathing. Let's not forget about venereal disease. Syphilis arrived in the late 15th century like a rock star, ravaging Europe, melting faces and leaving physicians completely baffled. They blamed everything from bad air to immoral thoughts. Treatments included mercury ointments. A little poison never hurt anyone, right? And sitting in saunas until your skin fell off. Spoiler, it didn't work. In that sex, you attempt privacy. Someone coughs. Someone else rolls over. The goat watches. You keep going. You undress, slowly, because your clothes are damp and stiff like medieval armor. Every layer peels away with a sound like old parchment. You're both sweaty, not from passion, just from effort. And there's a rat watching from the rafters, chewing judgmentally on a piece of stale bread. Finally, you're down to your linen shift. She's wearing hers. There's no full nudity unless someone's really committed. You fumble, shuffle, and eventually
It's logistical. The whole thing lasts 4 minutes, tops. 3 if someone sneezes. Afterward, you lie in silence, catching your breath, hoping your rash doesn't come back. No cuddling, too sweaty. No pillow talk, there's no pillow. Instead, you both roll to opposite sides of the hay, scratch yourselves discreetly, and try to sleep, while praying your bodies didn't just exchange new kinds of lice. You think that's bad? Try being rich. Nobles had access to perfumes, sure, but they rarely bathed. Instead, they masked their stench with floral oils and powders. Their clothes were crusty, their undergarments were never changed, and yet they acted like gods among men. Perfumed peacocks in velvet pants who smelled like rosewater and moldy cheese. They'd use handkerchiefs soaked in lavender to block out the smell of peasants. You once watched a duke faint because he smelled an onion. The irony? Rich people had worse dental hygiene. Sugar was a status symbol, so nobles' teeth rotted faster. Their breath, a crime against nature. And yet, romance still bloomed. Medieval love letters were full of flowery language and dead birds, literally. Men sent tokens like feathers, ribbons, even pickled organs.
Nothing says I adore you like a dried-out sparrow wrapped in twine. Weddings, that's another can of rotting worms. Bathing before the big day was suggested but not enforced. Most brides bathe once, maybe, the week before, then layered on herbs, holy water, and hope. The ceremony would be packed with family, clergy, livestock, and a constant background hum of body odor. You once attended a wedding where the priest stopped halfway through to wipe sweat from his face with the marriage certificate. Then came the feast. Everyone eats, drinks, sweats. People dance, which means bouncing in circles until someone vomits, usually into a wooden bowl, which is then discreetly placed under the table like a gift no one wants. Later that night, the couple is escorted to bed, not alone, with witnesses, because consummation must be confirmed. A priest, a midwife, or sometimes the bride's mother stands outside the door and listens for noises. There's even the occasional ceremonial inspection. You're not kidding. In some places, they'd check the sheets afterward for proof. You know what kind of proof. You shudder. You roll over in your own bed, thankful you're just a poor peasant with zero oversight. And yet, despite all this, despite the smells, the sweat, the hay in unholy places, people still fell in love. They had children, they sang terrible songs under the moonlight, and wrote bad poetry with quills dipped in beet juice. Romance survived, because humans are stubborn, because even in a world with no soap, no privacy, and no understanding of deodorant, someone still looks at someone else and says, "You smell like horse, but you're my horse." Back at home, after your soul-searching scrub at the medieval cesspool spa, you're feeling okay. Not clean, that's not a thing, but at least differently dirty. And now, it's time to address something far more treacherous than bathhouses and chamber pots: shaving. You catch your reflection in a murky bucket of water, the Middle Ages answer to a mirror. You tilt your head and take a good look at the wilderness growing on your face. Your beard isn't charming. It's not knight in shining armor material. It's more bandit in a bush meets damp moss in distress. But you can't just let it go. People may be walking bags of bacteria, but social norms are social norms. A scruffy face implies poverty, neglect, and, in some places, witchcraft. So today, you shave. You start with the tools. First, your razor, not the 5-blade titanium-coated kind. You're holding a piece of iron that's been sharpened on a rock by someone with arthritis. It's about as precise as a butter knife duct-taped to a spoon. You don't have shaving cream. The idea hasn't even been born yet. Instead, you smear a thin layer of animal fat on your cheeks, probably lard from this morning's porridge pig. It smells like sadness and bacon. You tell yourself it's moisturizing. Now you begin. The blade skates across your jawline with all the grace of a plow through gravel. Every pull feels like it's one swipe away from an impromptu tracheotomy. Blood bubbles up almost instantly. You dab at it with a rag that may or may not have been used to clean something unspeakable. The sting reminds you you're alive. You make it halfway down your cheek when you hit a bump. Ingrown hair, pimple, tiny demon sprouting from your skin. You dig the blade in to be sure. You scream, quietly, through your teeth. There's no anesthetic, no aloe. You dab the wound with vinegar and whimper. It burns so badly your soul tries to escape through your eyeballs. You feel lightheaded, possibly due to blood loss, or the psychological toll of being your own medieval surgeon. You power through, because grooming in the Middle Ages isn't about vanity, it's about not dying from infection and ridicule. Once your cheeks are shaved, you attempt the chin. Mistake. Your blade snags on something coarse, probably a hardened oat or bit of hay, and drags it down like it's pulling up roots. You reconsider everything: your hygiene, your ancestors, your life choices.
Eventually, you finish. You're bleeding from 3 places and sweating like a pig in confession, but your face is hairless. Mostly. One patch under your jaw still has some fuzz. You decide it adds character. Then comes hair care. You run your fingers through your scalp. You immediately regret it. Your hair is thick, tangled, matted, and loaded with a substance you don't recognize. It could be grease, it could be dirt, it could be the remnants of a mouse nest. You don't ask questions. There's no shampoo. There's ash. Actual ash. Some people mix it with water to create a kind of gritty paste. It's supposed to absorb oil. You smear it on your scalp like you're seasoning yourself for a medieval barbecue. It smells like yesterday's firewood and humiliation. You massage it in. You pretend it's working. You rinse it off in a half-full bucket of lukewarm disappointment. Then you reach for your conditioner. It's goose fat. No, seriously. People believed rubbing goose fat into your hair made it shiny and manageable. You scoop up a glob, sticky, cold, viscous, and smear it through your ends. It doesn't make your hair softer. It makes your hair into a weapon. If someone lights a match near your head, you might explode. Now, your hair is slick, your scalp is sore, and your dignity is officially in hiding. You grab a wooden comb, one missing half its teeth, and try to pull it through. You manage 2 strokes before it snaps. You sigh. You wrap your hair in a linen cloth and pretend it's intentional. Maybe someone will think you're a scholar, or just hiding the plague. You glance at your eyebrows. You leave them. No one had time for eyebrow maintenance, except maybe monks, and only the neurotic ones. You take a moment to breathe. The worst is over. You're groomed. By 14th century standards, you're basically a Calvin Klein model. And now, time to help your grandfather with his grooming. He's ancient, possibly immortal. His beard has its own zip code. You heat a small blade over a candle and prepare to shave him like you're carving roast meat. He growls. You growl back. It's a bonding ritual. You nick him only 3 times. Success. You finish by wiping his face with a damp rag and a prayer. He nods, silently approving, then shuffles back to the fire to stew in his own steam cloud. You look around the room. Everyone's doing something to clean themselves, or failing at it. Your sister scrubs her feet with a rock. Your cousin is pulling lice off his shirt and placing them in a collection jar for fun. Your mother is wiping her teeth with a bit of salt and dry twig. This is hygiene. This is effort. This is survival. You sit down by the hearth and poke at a pot of stew. You're exhausted. From shaving, from scraping, from not stabbing yourself fatally. Your arm itches. You scratch it without thinking, and flick something hard. You bathed in slime, shaved with a prison shank, and conditioned your hair with barnyard grease. Now, let's address the one part of your body that even your nightmares try to ignore. Your clothes. You reach for your tunic, same one you've worn for months. It's brown. Was it always brown? Unclear. It might have once been green, or beige, or just cleaner. But now it's crusty in some places, soft in others, and has developed its own weather system. You shake it out. Dust puffs into the air like you just released an ancient curse, because you're about to time travel back to a world without plumbing, privacy, or personal boundaries. There are no bathrooms here, no porcelain, no flushing, no 2-ply toilet paper. There's barely a wall to lean on. Tonight, you're entering a chapter of history where the closest thing to luxury was a wooden hole suspended above a river, and the worst-case scenario involved public defecation, angry geese, and an open sewer flowing past your window. You probably won't survive this. And even if you do, you'll never sit on a toilet the same way again. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is. I like to know which time zones are tuning in while I describe the many creative ways medieval folks managed their bowels. Now dim the lights. Let the fan hum like a breeze over a muddy moat, and let's begin. You wake up in the middle of the night with a familiar feeling in your gut. That unmistakable medieval rumble. Something you ate,
Yesterday's turnip mash, last week's eel stew, or maybe just raw terror, is ready to leave your body. There's no holding it in. You're going to have to go. Now. You sit up in the pitch-black dark. There's no candle, too expensive to burn just for poop. You feel around, quietly, so as not to wake the 6 other people sleeping in the same room. Your fingers brush against something smooth and cold. It's the chamber pot, an iron or ceramic bowl that everyone in your household shares. It's been used, dumped, reused, and used again. It smells like something died inside it, then came back to life just to die a second time. And tonight, it's your only option. You squat over it. Your knees crack. Your back protests. You try to aim. You miss. You try again. Success? Maybe. You don't check. Once you're done, you shuffle the pot to the corner. Someone else will deal with it in the morning. Probably you. The pot will be dumped into a larger bucket, and eventually that bucket gets emptied into the open sewer trench behind the house. That's right. Open sewer trench. It runs behind the row of homes like a river of eternal shame. Sometimes it even overflows. Children fall in. Drunk men fall in. You once saw a goose fall in and come out different. No one talks about what it saw. If you live in a town or city, your waste might get chucked into the street. That's not an exaggeration. People would literally toss their chamber pot contents out the window with a polite warning, "Gardyloo," which loosely translates to "Look out below," then splash. Hope you weren't walking under that window. Street gutters were essentially open toilets. The entire road system was built with the understanding that human waste needed somewhere to flow, and it flowed, right past your door, right through your sandals, right into your soul. Now, if you're a bit wealthier or just lucky, you might have access to a privy. A privy is a small wooden shack, sometimes attached to your house, sometimes hanging over a river. It's got a bench with a hole in it and a pit below. That's it. No door lock, no ventilation, no dignity. You walk into the privy holding your tunic like a warrior approaching battle. It smells like a combination of fermented cabbage, dead rats, and hot mud. You sit down and immediately regret everything you've ever done to lead to this point in your life. Sometimes people toss straw, ashes, or herbs into the hole to help with the smell. It doesn't help. It just makes the stink feel more festive. Now imagine you're at a castle. Must be better, right? Wrong. Castle toilets are called garderobes, and they are literally stone chutes built into the outer wall. You sit in a little nook high above the courtyard or moat, do your business, and it drops straight down, onto the ground, or into the water, or onto a peasant who is having a really bad day. Cold air rushes up the chute and freezes your butt. Rats sometimes crawl up, birds nest in the holes. One unlucky knight was famously killed when an enemy soldier climbed into the castle through the garderobe. Let that sink in. A man scaled a castle through poop. And toilet paper? Please. You have options. Rough cloth scraps, moss, straw, smooth river stones if you're lucky. In some places, people used their hands and rinsed them in a communal basin. Monks sometimes used a gomph stick, which was basically a wooden spatula dedicated to scraping poop off your butt. Sometimes it was shared. You have a moment of stillness. The chamber pot sits there, judging you. Your backside burns. You wipe with the dried corn husk. It makes everything worse. But the job is done. You crawl back to bed. You pray for morning. You pray for clean water. You pray for the invention of modern plumbing. Because in this world, going to the bathroom is an act of bravery.
It's morning now. The chamber pot is full, and the room smells like every bad decision made in the last 12 hours. Someone farted in their sleep, probably your uncle, and the dog is sniffing around the pot like it's a fine stew. You push aside the itchy wool blanket and rise from the straw mattress, your body stiff, your nose offended. First task of the day? Chamber pot duty. You lift the pot carefully. It sloshes. You gag. You whisper a small prayer to the saints of sanitation and tiptoe through the creaking floorboards, avoiding your cousin's foot and the family chicken who somehow always ends up sleeping indoors. Outside, the morning air greets you with the sharp contrast of dew and dung. You make your way to the communal waste trench, which runs behind the houses like a moat of medieval misery. You dump the pot's contents into the ditch. The splash is foul. A fly immediately lands on your cheek. You slap it away, smear something you wish you hadn't, and sigh. You rinse the pot with a ladle of stale rainwater from a barrel that's mostly algae now. Soap? Don't make yourself laugh. Soap is a dream whispered by nobles and nuns. Some villages assign waste removal to a designated person, the gong farmer. It's exactly as glamorous as it sounds. Gong farmers shovel human waste out of privy pits, load it into carts, and haul it outside the city walls. Their pay is surprisingly decent, but so is the risk of falling into a cesspit and becoming one with the job. It's happened. People drowned in medieval poop. It's not a metaphor. In cities, night soil collectors roam after dark. They knock on doors, gather chamber pots, and pour their contents into large vats or ditches. You can hear them sloshing down the alley before you see them, their boots soaked, their souls dead inside. One slip on the cobblestones, and your entire week is ruined. If you're in London or Paris, you might see public latrines, a marvel of civic planning, wooden benches overhanging rivers or moats, a whole row of people sitting cheek to cheek, trousers down, discussing the weather or the latest sermon. No stalls, no privacy, just communal poop time. Some even had gender-separated sections, though the smell didn't discriminate. You might find a monk on your left and a fishmonger on your right, both grunting in unison like it's a Gregorian bowel chant. But the river is not a magical self-cleaning stream. It's overloaded with human waste, dead animals, and every filthy runoff from every building nearby, and people still bathe in it. They draw drinking water from it. Children play near it. It's a miracle anyone lived past 12. Now let's get really fun. Flying toilets.
Yes, that's what historians now call the habit of throwing human waste out the window.
Upper floor residents would dump the contents of their chamber pots straight onto the street. The wealthier homes had little signs that warned pedestrians. Others just yelled, "Gardy Lou!" and hoped for the best. You learned very quickly to walk close to the walls during the day. The toilet zone was the middle of the road. You also learned to never look up if you heard a window creak. Those who didn't learn? They were the reason people started carrying cloaks over their heads like poop umbrellas. In marketplaces, the smell was a feature, not a flaw. The streets were sticky, muddy, and always suspiciously wet. Shoes were never clean. Neither were the vendors. You'd be buying a pie with one hand and swatting flies off your face with the other, while trying not to step into a puddle that bubbled ominously. You hoped it was rain. It wasn't. Privies often emptied directly into moats or rivers. That means castles, those bastions of civilization and military glory, were surrounded by literal toilets. When enemies laid siege, they camped downwind of years of royal bowel movements. There's a theory that the smell alone could drive off attackers. Forget arrows. Just wait until the wind changed. Now, how about toilets on the road? Travelers often relieved themselves in forests, fields, or behind rocks. You dug a shallow hole, did your business, and covered it. Sometimes. If you were lucky, you didn't sit on a nettle or squat near a snake. If you were unlucky, you were bitten. Somewhere important. Monks traveling between monasteries often carried small wooden scoops for burying their waste. That's probably the cleanest thing anyone did in 500 years. And yes, they wiped. With what? Moss, leaves, rags, hay. Smooth stones were a fan favorite in some areas. In monasteries, scholars wrote about the 3-stick method, which is exactly what it sounds like. 3 small sticks used to clean yourself. They were washed and reused.
Eventually. You once tried it. You still have emotional trauma.
Now let's touch on toiletry etiquette, because yes, there were rules. In wealthier homes, guests were offered cloths and basins to clean themselves before and after using the privy. You didn't just waltz in and leave your sins behind. You cleaned up, sort of. Nobles might have a servant carry away the waste, and in some rare cases, they had perfumed cloths or dried petals to mask the horror. Kings had groom of the stool, a position of extreme trust and power. Their job? To assist the king in using the toilet. Not joking. They managed everything from wiping to disposal to managing the royal bowel schedule. Some even became powerful advisors because nothing says loyalty like holding the chamber pot for the King of England. You, of course, have no such luxury. You finish your morning routine, scrape your boot clean on a patch of grass, and head toward the center of the village. The sewer trench bubbles ominously beside you. A dog laps water from it. You look away. A baby laughs. Somewhere, someone shouts about a clogged privy. And you just try not to breathe through your nose.
It's noon now and the sun is high. Warmth radiates from the rooftops, which might sound comforting until you realize what else is heating up. The streets, the walls, the waste. The entire village has become a slow-cooking latrine casserole. Every surface is simmering in a stew of humanity. You step gingerly through the market square. Cobblestones slick with mysterious slime. Children running barefoot, laughing, screaming, splashing puddles that absolutely did not come from the sky. You feel something soft and warm squish under your boot. You don't look down. You never look down. In the center of town sits a modest wooden structure with a crooked sign and a smell so potent it defies theology. This is the public privy, and today you've decided to brave it. Inside, it's exactly what you feared. A long bench with holes cut into it, side by side, no dividers. Just strangers pooping together, like a choir but smellier. You nod respectfully to the elderly man 2 holes down. He nods back. You both pretend this is normal. There's no flushing, no plumbing. Waste drops directly into a pit below where it waits, weeks, months, sometimes years, until a brave soul empties it or nature reclaims it. The wood creaks ominously beneath you. You wonder how many have fallen through. The air inside is thick, a medieval soup of methane, mildew, and memories. You breathe shallowly through your mouth and try not to gag as you do your business. There's graffiti carved into the wall, little drawings of butts, saints, and suspiciously detailed demons. Someone scratched "help" above your head. You relate. Beside the bench is a small bucket. Inside, wiping tools. Today, it's moss. Sometimes it's cloth. Sometimes it's a communal sponge on a stick dipped in vinegar between uses. You've heard of Roman latrines using that trick, but you suspect this sponge hasn't seen vinegar in a decade. You opt for moss and pray it wasn't freshly harvested from the haunted side of the woods. Outside the privy, a boy stands with a bucket of sweet water, a euphemism for a slightly less filthy rinse. You splash your hands. The water turns gray. You wipe them on your tunic. Hygiene is a spectrum, and you're sliding toward the low end. You step back into the sun. Your nose has adapted. You don't smell the stench anymore. That's not a good sign. That's survival. You walk through an alley, nose still tingling. On the wall there's a stone chute, a primitive waste disposal system. Residents on upper floors relieve themselves into clay pots and pour them into these vertical pipes which empty into the street or directly into the nearest body of water. Gravity is the real sewer system. A splash lands near your boot. You flinch. A woman on the second floor waves apologetically. You nod. You're used to it.
You pass a bakery. The smell of bread almost overpowers the odor of dung. Almost. You consider buying a loaf, but then you notice the baker casually relieving himself in a bucket behind the shop. He doesn't break eye contact. You move on. Now you're passing the tanner's district, where leather is made by soaking animal hides in urine and lime. The stench here is violent.
Piles of hides lie in vats, bubbling, releasing a fog so potent it could wilt iron. The workers' hands are stained yellow, their boots squish. This is what industry smells like. Further down, you see a woman pouring hot ashes into a privy pit. It's one of the few sanitation methods that actually works. Ashes neutralize the worst of the rot. For a few hours. Then the pit remembers who it is. You watch a rat leap out and scurry into the shadows. It looks healthier than you. In larger cities, sanitation laws exist on parchment, but not in practice. Fines for throwing waste in the streets, edicts against fouling the alleys, but enforcement lacks, unless a noble steps in something. And even then, only if their shoe is expensive. You spot a man crouched near a wall, defecating in public like it's a performance. He even whistles. You keep walking. There's nothing to do. No guards, no scolding, just one more deposit in the medieval ecosystem. And what about the church? Surely holy places are cleaner? Nope. Monasteries had their own latrines, often connected to small running water systems that washed waste away. A genius design. Until you realized the water was reused for drinking downstream. Monks bathed once a month, if they were lucky. Pilgrims used every bush on the holy grounds. Even sacred soil has a breaking point. You hear bells ringing. Time for midday prayers. The faithful gather in the square, kneeling beside sewer trenches, bowing with reverence, while flies circle their heads like halos. Faith doesn't cancel odor, but it helps you pretend. By now, your stomach is growling. You haven't eaten since dawn. You buy a meat pie. It's lukewarm. The crust is flaky. The meat is ambiguous. You take a bite. The flavor hits you. So does the realization this vendor is standing directly above the waste channel that runs behind the tavern. His shoes are in it. So are yours. You stop chewing. You finish anyway. You need the calories. And so the day trudges on. Waste piles higher. Trenches overflow. Buckets clank. The village functions like a digestive tract. Everything comes in, everything goes out, and no one wants to talk about the middle. You pass a small house. The window is open. You hear someone groaning inside, followed by a splash. You don't ask. You don't want to know. And then, just for a moment, a breeze blows in from the east, clean, cool, almost fragrant. You close your eyes and savor it. Then the wind shifts, and the scent of the pigsty hits you like divine punishment. You sneeze, a dog barks, a child screams something about a poop ghost. You keep walking. It's barely past noon, and medieval hygiene? It's just getting started. You've made it to the outskirts of the village, and the air is, miraculously, less weaponized. Fewer chamber pots, more trees. But don't let the greenery fool you. Sanitation doesn't magically improve just because you're standing near a bush. In fact, for most medieval folk, the great outdoors was their preferred place to do the unholy. Because why go to a public privy when the woods are free, the wind is kind, and there's a stump that kind of looks like a chair? You wander off the path and find a quiet spot. This is nature's toilet. And today, that's your best option. You squat behind a tree. The ground is soft, damp, and alive. You regret not checking for nettles or snakes or whatever creature just hissed under your left thigh. But the deed is done. There's no toilet paper, of course, so you scan the area. A crumpled leaf, risky. A tuft of moss, spongy, promising. A rock, dangerous but effective. You pick the moss and hope it wasn't just part of someone else's failed bathroom adventure. One wipe, two wipes, a sigh. Done. You bury it, sort of. You kick some dirt over the mess and pretend that counts as sanitation. Back on the road, you spot a small river trickling through a bend in the trees. Peaceful, idyllic, deadly. You know by now that this water is where people wash, dump, soak, and sometimes lose a body or two. It's been blessed and cursed, defiled and revered. You splash your hands and decide not to think about it too hard. Further along, you pass a shepherd relieving himself against a tree, completely unbothered by your presence. You wave, he waves back, midstream. There's no shame, no privacy, just efficiency. You keep walking. Near the pasture, you hear singing. A group of washerwomen has gathered near a larger stream. They're scrubbing linens with ashes and stones, humming hymns while stomping on the fabric like grapes. You notice a pile of underclothes beside them, yellowed, crusted, still warm from whoever last wore them. One woman waves you off when you approach too close. This is their space, their territory. And yes, they also pee in this stream when necessary. You nod, you understand. Later in the afternoon, you pass a construction site, some poor souls building a new cottage. One man stops hammering and heads behind a stack of timber. You know what he's doing. So does everyone else. No one comments. That's just how it's done. No porta potties, no break rooms, just a tree and the wind.
In larger towns, there's slightly more infrastructure. You might find garderobes built into the walls of stone buildings, small rooms with holes in the floor that empty directly into the moat or the alley below. You look up and spot one now. A tiny wooden box jutting out from the second story of a merchant's house. Someone's using it. You hear the echo. You step back just in time. A splash, a curse, a narrowly avoided baptism. You stop at a nearby tavern. The barkeep is friendly. He offers you ale, a stew, and more importantly, a chance to use the indoor bucket behind the barrels. It's exactly what you expect. Dark, damp, splintery, and surrounded by flies that have seen too much. You go anyway. You've lowered your standards. You left them back in Section 1. After dinner, you help a few locals clean up the pigsty. This involves shoveling more than just hay. One man jokes that pigs are cleaner than humans. You laugh, then realize he's serious. In the corner of the yard is a latrine trench, a shallow ditch dug for the specific purpose of collecting human waste. It's supposed to be temporary. It's been here 5 years. Someone tosses in a handful of straw and shrugs. Fertilizer, they say. You don't ask what they're fertilizing. You head back toward the village. It's dusk now and people are using their chamber pots one last time before sleep. You can hear it happening through thin wooden walls, grunts, splashes, murmured complaints. One old woman yells at her husband for missing, again. Some toss the contents out the window with a shout. Others walk to the ditch behind the church and dump it there. You join the procession. Your own pot sloshes as you walk. The ditch burps. You return home. Back in your hovel, the family pot is set near the fire again. Still warm, still half full. You decide not to empty it again. Tomorrow's problem. You lie down on your straw mattress. Someone next to you snores. A baby coughs. A rat scuttles near your foot. You scratch your leg and realize you may have sat in something. You sigh. And just before you fall asleep, you hear it. A splash, a window, a curse, a goat scream. Medieval plumbing in action. Morning again. The sun is barely up, the rooster is late, and your bladder is ahead of schedule. You fumble in the dark for the chamber pot. It's where it always is, just past your sleeping cousin, between the wall and a stack of onions someone forgot to eat 6 months ago. You nudge your way over, groggy, hoping no one else filled it in the night. Spoiler, they did. You squat, you aim, you hope. The floor creaks. Someone groans. You whisper an apology to no one in particular. Then, relief, followed by regret. The pot sloshes when you set it back down, and you pray the goat doesn't knock it over again like last week. You crawl back into bed, but it's too late. You're awake now, and so is your nose. The smell hits first, then the heat. The fire has warmed the room just enough to reawaken the full bouquet of overnight bodily emissions. The chamber pot is only part of it. There's the damp socks, the dog's breath,
the collective breath of 5 people who haven't brushed their teeth since birth, and of course, the ever-present must of hay, mold, and old sins. You step outside for air, and you're not alone. Half the village is already up, wandering to and from the ditch behind the houses, each one carrying a pot, a bucket, or, in some cases, nothing at all. A man squats near the fence like he's claiming territory. A toddler pees into a boot. You just nod and keep walking. You pass by the communal latrine trench, still open from the night before. Someone has added a board across the top, like a very sad bench. You see a man seated there now, reading a scroll and humming, multitasking. You respect it. The trench bubbles. You move on. Later that morning, you help a neighbor clear out her privy shed, a wooden outhouse tucked behind a vegetable patch. It leans left, like it's tired of existing. Inside is a hole over a pit, surrounded by old rags, dry leaves, and one very brave spider. You shovel out the worst of it and throw lime powder into the hole. It barely helps. She thanks you with a hunk of stale bread and a nod. In medieval terms, that's love. Work begins. You haul bricks again. The sun rises, the sweat returns, and by midday, you need to relieve yourself again. There's no chamber pot nearby. The ditch is too far. You walk to the alley between 2 thatched huts and make do. It's shadowy, secluded, sort of.
You hear footsteps and stop, but the footsteps don't stop. They join you. Now you're both standing there, side by side, peeing silently into the same patch of grass. You don't make eye contact. You both nod. A sacred bond is formed and never acknowledged again. By mid-afternoon, the tavern's outhouse is a beacon of hope. You stop in, order a small beer, and request access to the bucket. It's not a euphemism. Behind the kitchen is a half-room, half-stall structure with a ceramic pot inside. There's a curtain. No door, no dignity. You pull the curtain and do your business. Outside, you hear a bard playing a lute. Life continues. After work, you return home. Your little brother has spilled the chamber pot. Again. It's now under the bed. He swears he tried to clean it. With what, you ask? He points to your pillow. You sit down. You stand up. You light some dried herbs and hope they cover the smell. They don't, but they make you sneeze hard enough to forget for a second. Evening falls. Your mother gives you a look that says, "Go clean the pot." You do. You carry it outside, avoiding the goat, the dog, and your brother's wide-eyed apology. You reach the trench. You dump it. The trench gulps like it's hungry. The splash, somehow louder at night. You rinse the pot in the barrel. The water's cloudy. You swirl it around and pour it out. Good enough. You leave it by the fire again, ready for the next round. Someone else enters the room holding their own pot. You both nod. It's a dance, a rhythm, a daily ballet of liquids, containers, ditches, and shame. But you're used to it now. You've adjusted. Medieval toilet life is no longer horrifying. It's just the background music of existence. And tonight, you lie in bed, stomach full of beans, bladder full of regret, and hope your dreams aren't interrupted by an urgent wake-up and the cold touch of ceramic in the dark. You close your eyes. The goat sneezes, and somehow you fall asleep anyway. It's morning again. Your eyes creak open like the hinges on your front gate, and you feel it. That ominous pressure in your gut. The breakfast beans have declared war, and your body is the battlefield. But you're not rushing to the chamber pot this time. No, today is different. Today, you're traveling. Maybe it's a pilgrimage. Maybe it's a market day. Maybe someone died and their cousin's goat inheritance must be settled 3 villages away. Doesn't matter. You're on the road, and the road has no toilets. You tie your belt tighter to hold everything in. Your pants, your dignity, and the bubbling rebellion within. The countryside is vast and pretty if you squint past the flies and horse droppings. Trees wave in the breeze like they're mocking your clenched stomach. You walk and walk and walk. You look around for a bush with potential. But every bush has potential. And every bush already has someone behind it. A merchant, a monk, a peasant, a nobleman who has dismounted his horse and is squatting like he's making a business deal with the earth. Eventually you find your own bush, a decent one, some privacy. You shuffle into position and let nature take its medieval course. You finish, reach for your options. No toilet paper, obviously. You've got a few choices. Leaves, scratchy. Moss, luxurious. A smooth rock, bold. Or the hem of your undertunic, desperate. Today, it's moss. A gentle dab. A quiet thank you to the forest. And you're on your way. Back in town, public life resumes. At the tavern, someone knocks over the piss bucket again. It seeps under the table like a slow-moving medieval lava. No one flinches. The barkeep sighs and tosses a handful of straw over it. Problem solved. The local church? It has a small outhouse behind the apse, mostly for the monks, but sometimes for desperate passers-by. It's stone, cool, and smells like incense, barely masking despair. You sneak in. Inside is a bench with a hole, a bucket beneath, and a wooden carving of a saint above your head who's definitely judging you. You whisper an apology to St. Gregory and hurry out. Later that day, a noble procession passes through the village. Horses, trumpets, banners. It's majestic, until one of the noblewomen leans out of her carriage and asks to borrow the tavern's bucket. Turns out, even silk-clad aristocrats aren't immune to digestion. But nobles do it differently. They carry portable commodes, little wooden boxes with padded seats and compartments for scented herbs. You see one carried by a red-faced servant, trailing behind the lady like an embarrassed accessory. Royalty, it seems, poops in private, but not alone. Back at your hut, someone's building a two-seater privy. That's right, 2 holes, side by side, for couples or siblings, or anyone who likes awkward eye contact while relieving themselves. You don't question it. You just hope your house gets one someday. You end your day helping your neighbor dig a new trench behind the pigsty. It's a big one, a community latrine for festivals. You shovel dirt, sweat dripping, trying not to breathe too deeply. Flies swarm like they were invited. The hole is deep. The future is grim. But it's progress. You wipe your forehead with your sleeve and think, one day, someone will invent plumbing. You don't know what that means, but it feels like hope. That night, the sky is clear, the stars are bright, and your stomach is mostly quiet. You lie down by the fire, pot nearby, hay poking your back, and think to yourself, you're managing. You're surviving. And in a world where toilets are a luxury and privacy is a myth, that's a miracle. But today, for some stupid reason, you've decided to attempt laundry. You carry your clothes, tunic, undertunic, socks made from regret, to the communal washing spot near the river. It's where everyone goes to pretend they're doing something about their hygiene. You find a flat rock, slap the tunic down, and start beating it like it owes you rent. Next comes soap. You have 2 options.
Wood ash mixed with lye, a caustic chemical that eats through dirt, fabric, and your hopes. Urine. No, not as a joke. Actual urine. Fermented, aged, collected from chamber pots and saved in jugs labeled, "Do not drink again." Turns out ammonia is a powerful cleanser. So your neighbors soak their linens in old pee, stir it like soup, and rinse it in the same river where everyone bathes, dumps waste, and probably gave birth last week. Today you choose the safer option, ashes and water. You rub the mix into your tunic. It immediately stiffens like it's trying to escape its own fate. The smell is acrid, like if a fireplace had halitosis. You scrub. You rinse. You beat it on the rock again, just for emotional closure. After what feels like an hour, your shirt looks slightly less shameful, still not clean, but less dangerous to society. You wring it out. The water that falls out is the color of regret. You try not to gag.
Then comes drying. You hang it over a branch. The wind does its best, so does the sun, but nothing in this world can fully kill the embedded funk of months-old armpit grease and trench sweat. Your tunic now smells like wet campfire and old garlic. You do the same to your socks. They're less footwear and more cloth tubes of fungal despair. You scrub until the holes get bigger. Now you have toe windows. Fashion. Your under tunic? You're tempted to throw it in the fire, but linen's expensive, and you already owe your neighbor half a duck for borrowing his lye last week. So you scrub, you rinse, and you accept that it will never be white again. Medieval white is just light brown. Meanwhile, other villagers are washing too. A woman nearby is boiling her husband's pants in a metal pot. Another is shaking out a cloak full of straw, beetles, and childhood trauma. A boy is scrubbing a pair of leather shoes using what appears to be sand and a prayer. There's a girl washing her hair in the same water you just dumped your sock broth into. You feel guilty for a second. Then you remember, everyone's done it to everyone. There are no innocent parties in medieval laundry crimes. Back home, you hang your clothes near the fire to dry faster. They come out stiff, crunchy. You could slice bread with your tunic, but at least now they smell less like rotting soup and more like smoke and mild despair. You pull on your semi-clean shirt. It scrapes your skin like burlap made of broken dreams. Your trousers are better, meaning they're intact. The wool itches, but you don't bleed. That's an upgrade. Now comes the fun part, your shoes. Your boots are made of leather that's seen war, famine, and possibly the inside of a cow's colon. The soles are thinning, the stitching's unraveling. One has a nail sticking through the heel that you've just learned to avoid by walking like you're dodging landmines. You stuff a bit of straw into the toes, not for comfort, just to stop your feet from freezing solid when it rains. You know it's going to rain soon. You can smell it. Or maybe that's your cousin. Anyway, you're dressed. You're moderately dry. And for once, you feel like less of a sentient compost pile. That's when your little brother vomits on your shoe. No warning, no apology, just a tiny geyser of cabbage and trauma, right on your left foot. You close your eyes, you take a deep breath. You clean your boot with a handful of grass and the last of your willpower. Then you stomp your foot until the mess feels like part of the original boot design. Medieval fashion, now featuring biohazards. You look around the room. Everyone is getting dressed. Everyone smells like they fought a war with a swamp and lost. But you're ahead of the curve. You've washed, you've scrubbed, you've sanitized with ashes and smoke. And for a fleeting moment, you feel proud. Then the dog pees on your drying socks. Of course it does. Now that you've endured the sacred torment of medieval laundry and survived the public urination of both people and livestock, it's time to handle a different battlefield altogether. Your hair. Yes, your hair. You've already smeared ashes and goose fat into it once this week, which means you're overdue for another round of medieval hair care. And calling it care is generous. It's more like low-budget damage control with ingredients stolen from a barn and a witch's spice rack. You sit near the hearth. The heat makes your scalp sweat before you even begin. That's good. It softens the crust. You pull out your grooming toolkit.
a wooden comb with 2 teeth left, a handful of dry rosemary, and a small pot of animal fat that's been slowly melting by the fire since breakfast. Your cousin joins you. She's got a knife, a bored expression, and lice. Not on her, on you. And she's decided it's time to extract them. She doesn't ask. She just grabs your head like it owes her money and starts picking through your roots. It's an ancient ritual. Not out of love, not out of hygiene, just necessity. Left unchecked, the lice multiply, build a small empire on your scalp, start minting their own coins, and eventually declare independence. She finds the first one. "Big boy," she mutters. She crushes it between her thumbnail and the comb handle. "Pop," you wince. She grins. She finds 3 more, flicks them into the fire like she's performing a flea exorcism. You sit there, still, staring into the flames, and wonder if your soul just left your body. Then it's your turn to check her hair, tit for tat. You dig into the tangles like you're searching for treasure in a bramble bush. You find a flea, you name it Sir Geoffrey, and squash it with dignity. It's bonding. Violent, itchy bonding. Once the lice are mostly gone, it's time for round 2, herbal scrubbing. You take the rosemary, dried, brittle, stolen from a monastery garden, and crumble it into your hands. You mix it with a dab of warm goose fat, creating a chunky, fragrant sludge. It smells like Thanksgiving dinner got punched by a forest. You rub it into your scalp. It stings. That means it's working. You massage it in, slowly, working your fingers through the knots. Your nails scrape the dirt off your scalp. Underneath the fat and the ash and the trauma, you begin to remember what it feels like to not be crusty. It's almost spiritual. Your cousin hands you the comb. You take it. You brace yourself. The first tug rips out a chunk of hair. You scream internally. You keep going. Comb, tug, rip, sigh, repeat. Every stroke brings out tangles, bugs, a few emotional flashbacks, and enough dead hair to knit a small tunic. You pile it all in a corner like some kind of ritual sacrifice to the hygiene gods. Eventually you get the comb through from root to tip, once. Victory. Your hair is now slick, pungent, and vaguely pointy from all the weird angles it's taken, but it's yours. And it's clean, again, by medieval standards, which means it no longer actively assaults the senses. You wrap it in a cloth to keep the grease from staining your pillow, which, again, is just a sack of old hay with mousebite marks on it. You lay the cloth on your head like a medieval bonnet of honor. You glance at your father. He hasn't washed his hair since the Crusades. It's solid, like a helmet made of sadness. You consider offering to help. Then you remember the last time he bit someone during a combing session. You move on. Your sister is now attempting to style her hair. She has 1 ribbon, 3 wooden beads, and a dream. She braids her hair in thick, ropey strands and threads the beads through the ends. It's not fashion. It's function. Braiding helps keep the lice colonies contained. It also prevents you from accidentally swallowing your own hair while sleeping, which has happened before. Not pretty. Sometimes, for special occasions, people dye their hair with herbs or mud. Blonde was popular in some regions. People used lye, lemon juice, or even pigeon droppings to lighten their strands. You tried it once. You cried. You smelled like pigeon for a week. Still, there's vanity here. In the middle of filth and famine and war, people still try to look good, or at least less terrifying. Your neighbor once rubbed honey into her curls before a festival. She got swarmed by bees halfway through the feast. Tragic, but radiant. You stare into the fire, now feeling the weight of your freshly scraped scalp and greasy strands. You look clean, sort of. You feel like you tried, and that's more than most. Then your uncle walks in. He hasn't touched his hair in a decade. It's matted into one solid clump, like a medieval dreadlock made of filth and ambition. He calls it his blessing. You think it's a biohazard. He sits down next to you, scratches his head with a fork, and mutters something about lice being good luck.
You nod politely. It's easier than arguing. Suddenly, you remember something. A rare memory. Nobles sometimes wore powdered wigs. They shaved their heads, powdered them white, and wore curled hair pieces instead. Why? To hide lice, to show off wealth, and sometimes to look fancy while dying of syphilis. You wonder if the nobles ever had their cousins pick through their hair with dirty fingernails. You wonder if anyone is ever truly clean in this world. You doubt it. But tonight, your scalp doesn't itch. Your hair doesn't smell like livestock. And for the first time in weeks, you might not wake up to a flea migration on your forehead. Small wins, big lice. Welcome to medieval hair care. For 75, you've washed, shaved, scraped, combed, and survived countless parasites with names like Gerald and Sir Geoffrey. But now it's time to confront a subject you've been dreading since the sun came up: going to the bathroom. You see, in the Middle Ages, toilets weren't a private, tiled sanctuary with soft lighting and a fan that pretends it's masking sound. Toilets were holes. Literal holes. Sometimes pits, sometimes buckets. Occasionally, bridges. Let's begin with the basics. You need to relieve yourself. Your stomach is making medieval threats, and your bowels are in open rebellion. So you step outside with the urgency of someone who knows full well that hesitation means disaster. Behind your house is the communal latrine. It's a shallow ditch surrounded by buzzing flies and broken dreams. A wooden plank is balanced across it, a place to perch your suffering body while praying for a quick exit. There's no privacy, no door, no walls, just nature, neighbors, and humiliation. You squat. You contemplate your life choices. Then you do what must be done. The stench rises like an angry spirit. It fills your nostrils. It invades your soul. It whispers to your ancestors. You breathe through your mouth, then regret that even more. Now comes the big question. What do you wipe with? There's no toilet paper, obviously. Probably your options include a fistful of hay, abrasive and judgmental, a smooth river stone, rare and icy, the sleeve of your undertunic, shameful but soft. Nothing. Don't ask how many choose this. Today you go with the hay. You grab a clump, check it for thorns or insects, and do your business. It's not effective, it's not dignified, but it happens. You toss the used hay into the pit and quickly move away, legs trembling, dignity evaporated. But that's just your latrine. Let's take a tour of some other medieval toilets. 1. Castle garderobes. If you're rich, you poop in a castle. Great, except your toilet is a stone seat with a hole that drops straight down the wall into a moat. That's right, a literal poop chute. The smell wafts back up. The splash echoes for miles. And heaven help you if a gust of wind comes the wrong way. Oh, and guess what? The moat is where people fish. Bon appetit. Number 2. Public privies. In cities, there are shared outhouses, wooden shacks where dozens of strangers relieve themselves over one giant pit. It's always full, always warm, always buzzing with activity. You sit, the wood is wet, you cry a little, then someone jiggles a door because they don't know you're inside. You screech, they apologize, you both pretend it never happened. Number 3. Chamber pots. If you don't want to go outside at night, you go in a pot. A big ceramic bowl you keep under the bed. Everyone has one. Everyone hates theirs. Some people decorate them with painted roses. It doesn't help. In the morning, someone has to empty it. Usually a child, possibly you. You grab the pot carefully like it's an ancient relic. You carry it outside, trying not to spill. Then you reach the window. Yes, the window. And you throw it. Into the street, into the gutter, into the nearest flow of open sewage that winds through the town like a lazy river of biological warfare. Before you toss it, you're supposed to shout something. It varies by country. In English towns, the traditional warning was, "Gardez-vous!"
a medieval French corruption meaning, "Watch out for the water," as if this watery horror deserved such a polite name. If someone doesn't move fast enough, well, now they're baptized in community bowel sins. That's how you make enemies. Or wives, depends on the century. You've seen it happen, you've heard the screams, you've also been on the receiving end once. You don't talk about that day. Number 4, bridges. If you're traveling and there's no toilet in sight, you use a bridge. You squat over the edge and pretend you're majestic. You're not. You're a biological threat dangling over a public water source. Fishermen hate you. Birds hate you. You hate yourself. But the real kicker? No one washes their hands afterward. That's right, no soap, no rinse, no problem. You just wipe your hands on your tunic and move on. Or maybe dunk them in a bucket if you're feeling fancy. Germ theory doesn't exist yet. Bacteria is still considered witchcraft. Everyone's immune system is operating on pure fear. And what happens when someone gets sick from this toilet chaos?
They die. Or worse, they survive but spread it to everyone else. The streets of your village often smell like waste, because these sewage systems are just open trenches. You walk beside them daily. You step over them, sometimes into them. You once dropped a turnip into one and didn't tell anyone. You hear stories about ancient Rome, how they had working plumbing, underground sewer systems, public baths that didn't smell like goat farts. You assume it's a lie, or magic, or both. You dream of a world with porcelain thrones and 2-ply tissue, but instead you squat over a hole and pray not to fall in. And yes, people have fallen in. There are tales, horrifying tales, of villagers who slipped and sank into the muck, never to return, of cesspits collapsing beneath nobles mid-squat, of unfortunate souls whose final moments were a mixture of shock, terror, and gastrointestinal betrayal. You finish your latrine ritual, pull up your trousers, still damp, and walk back into the village with your head held high. Because you survived medieval toileting. You wiped with hay. You dodged a flying chamber pot. And you didn't fall in. That's a win. You're walking through the village now. Your hair sticky with goose fat, your shirt crackling with fire-dried sweat, and your soul still recovering from the emotional whiplash of public defecation. But today, there's a different energy in the air, a buzz, a vibe, something fermented, musky, and vaguely floral. That's right, it's date night, or at least the medieval equivalent of romance, where hygiene is optional and attraction is mostly determined by how many teeth you still have. Let's talk sex, smells, and medieval seduction. First of all, there's no perfume, not the kind you know. There are herbs, maybe a bit of lavender tucked in a shirt pocket, maybe some rosemary rubbed into the armpits until they sting less. But the real cologne of the era? Sweat, meat grease, and a whisper of sheep. And yet, despite everything, you see couples, flirting, courting, sometimes marrying. You wonder how anyone feels romantic when everyone smells like a walking soup. Let's start with the courtship process. You see a girl near the well. She hasn't bathed in days. Her hair is braided, her apron is stained, and there's flour in her eyebrows. But her teeth are mostly there and she doesn't have visible boils. You're in love. You approach. You say something suave like, "Nice goat." She giggles, or maybe chokes. Hard to tell. She hands you a flower, or a weed. Either way, you take it. In a world without scented lotion or designer clothes, attraction is based on survival traits. Can she churn butter? Can he plow a field without passing out? Does she have access to a clean water bucket? These are the aphrodisiacs of your time. Now comes the fun part, getting close. You lean in. Big mistake. Her breath smells like fermented cabbage and onions. Yours smells like hot dog water and sin. The air between you becomes a battlefield of halitosis, but neither of you flinch. This is the game. You've trained for this.
Later that evening, if things go well, you might end up in the same bed. That sounds romantic until you realize bed means a hay mattress shared by 5 people, a goat and a dog with abandonment issues. Let's talk about hygiene at the marketplace, or rather, the complete and total lack thereof. You pass a butcher's stall. There's a pig's head on a table, flies gathering for brunch. No ice, no refrigeration, just raw meat, sitting in the sun like it's auditioning for a horror film. The butcher waves at you with a blood-covered hand, then picks up a sandwich with the same fingers. Bon appetit. Next to him is the baker. His stall smells better, yeasty and warm, but his apron hasn't been washed since the last king was alive. His fingernails are black. He scratches his beard, kneads some dough, and keeps going. No gloves, no shame. Someone selling cheese. You're not sure what animal it came from. The wheel is sweating. You poke it, it jiggles, you buy it anyway, because hunger is stronger than fear. Now you approach the fishmonger. He's yelling about eels. He pulls one out of a bucket and slaps it onto a plank. It twitches. A child screams. Another cheers. You pretend to be interested so he doesn't throw one at you. It's a real risk. Here's a secret. Most vendors have no access to clean water. They wash their tools in rain barrels. They rinse their hands in shared buckets. And they clean their stalls with bundles of hay that just smear the filth around like medieval abstract art. You're back in bed now. The fire has burned low. The village is quiet. No shouting, no chamber pots flying through windows, no mysterious goat noises, just the soft rustle of straw and the occasional creak of wooden beams settling above you. And you've made it. You survived medieval hygiene. You washed badly. You bathed rarely. You shared combs, beds, buckets, and bodily fluids with people who thought prayer could cure syphilis. You wiped with hay. You kissed people who hadn't brushed their teeth since birth. You survived your own wedding night, outlived bloodletting, escaped the plague twice, and even dodged death by turnip at the market. And somehow here you are, breathing, resting, existing. Not because the world was clean or safe or even slightly sensible, but because humans, for all their filth and folly, refused to quit. Your ancestors were stubborn, scrappy, smelly, and impossibly resilient. They kept going. Through lice, through love, through laundry that could legally be considered a weapon. And now, you lie here in clean sheets with a toothbrush on your sink, soap in your shower, and probably 5 bottles of shampoo you forgot you had. You live in a world where you don't have to boil rosemary to feel human again. So breathe deep. Appreciate the silence. Let the ridiculous, itchy, grimy memories of medieval life fade into a strange, oddly comforting dream. And when you wake, maybe, just maybe, floss. Hey, if you enjoyed this bizarre bedtime journey through the history of human hygiene, don't forget, like the video, subscribe, and comment your current location and local time. I'd love to know who else is falling asleep while contemplating medieval butt-scratching rituals. Sleep well.